Okay, we are live. Guys, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Wednesday night edition of the Let's Talk Fishing podcast. My name is Jay Angel, and I'm going to be your host. With me tonight, I have Norman Lee. Norman Lee is the co-host of the Deck Talk podcast. He's also, a tournament fisherman, a full-time guide. He markets some really interesting baits that he was showing me earlier. Man, this guy pretty much does it all. I can't wait to talk to him. How you doing tonight, Norman?
Hey Jay, what's going on, man? How you doing? First of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me on your show, man. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, because I can't do this. I can't do this show without people like you, Norman. So, I've been watching your podcast for a while. I know that you're affiliated with iBass 360. Man, just sorry it took me so long to call you.
Man, I tell you what, man, it's just living the dream. It's just a blessing,
It sure is.
A blessing to be able to do what I do and just enjoy what I do, man. And you can't beat being able to fish and, try to make a living doing it anyway.
If you can do that, man, I have respect for you. I have a lot of respect for you. So, you grew up in a place I wish I would have grown up in Northern Illinois. I mean, I'm close to Wisconsin, I'm close to Michigan, but still, you got to drive for hours before you get to great fishing. You grew up right there in Florida. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Matt, you know what, Jay? I tell you what, if you're a fisherman, you love to fish. The place I grew up, where I was born and raised. I was actually born in Miami, but I pretty much lived in Lake Placid, Florida all my life.
Wow.
And right in the area where I grew up, there basically was 27 lakes right in around it. I mean, within a 10-minute drive, you had 27 lakes right in your area. Let alone, that our area, it was like a 35-minute drive to the closest ramp you had on Lake Okeechobee. So, and then a little bit north of us, another hour north, we had Lake Kissimmee. So where I grew up, man, and I was one of the only kids when I was going to high school. I said from day one, I'm never leaving, because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to fish. If I didn't have a rod and reel in my hand, even at 6-7 years old, I always could remember having that rod and reel in my hand at a very early age. So I wanted to do it. Basically, my passion was fishing. And where I grew up, there's no better place to do it because of all of the lakes, all that you had kind of right at your fingertips. And so, yeah, man, if you love fishing, best place in the world to grow up.
That's awesome. I pretty much grew up the same way in Illinois, but we would ride our bikes to a couple of streams that were close by, and there were smallmouth bass in there. Sometimes we got chased out by the farmers, because we just wandered the streams.
Right.
Nobody wants a bunch of kids, doing destructive stuff like fishing on their land.
Yeah.
I think they probably wouldn't even chase us out today because they got better things to worry about. But anyways, so you grew up in Florida. When did you start fishing competitively?
Well, back in 95. Of course, I always had a dream of fishing tournaments. That's what I wanted to do. When I was 6-7 years old, I grew up watching the Bassmaster television show.
Oh, yeah.
And,
absolutely.
Fishing with Roland Martin, Wilmer Cass, Shaw Grisby. I grew up watching these guys. And when my best friends were in their backyard pretending they were Joe Montana with 2 minutes to go in the Bassmaster Classic down at their local farm pond or whatever, I was actually walking down at 7 years old to our lake, pretending I was Roland Martin on the dock with 2 minutes to go in the Classic and had to catch that one fish that was going to win it for me. So that's kind of where my thought process was even back then. So 1995, I seen there's an ad in the paper for a local bass club. I think it was its first or second year, and its first tournament of the year was coming up that Sunday. So out of the whim, I just called the phone number that was on the newspaper article and talked to him. And he said, yeah, he told me where to show up. The first tournament was on Lake Okeechobee. And at that time, I knew how to catch fish. I'd catch fish. It was not 1995, so I don't know how old I was, probably 27, 26. I can't even do the math. But anyway, I showed up at Lake Okeechobee, and yeah, think about this for a second. I was fishing by myself. Everybody else had partners. My boat was probably a 30-year-old Tidecraft. It had
Okay.
stick steering. It had 18 horse Seahorse Johnson that you had a pull rope start, and I was by myself. And I had no clue what I was doing when it came to the competitive tournament side of things. So I was as green as I came. And unfortunately, that day, the tournament went out of a place called Harney Pond Canal, that's real known for a lot of the local club tournaments. And there's club tournaments that come from all over the state to fish Lake Okeechobee. Just so happens that day, there was probably about 15 other tournaments. So when I showed up, I didn't know anybody in the club I was going to fish. Had no clue who anybody was. I showed up. There was a boat line to launch about 150 boats long, and I was in the middle of it. Could you imagine? Somebody that's really green, has no clue what they're doing.
Yeah.
Don't even know what I'm going to do when I get to the ramp. All nervous, and I have big bass boats behind me, big bass boats in front of me, and I have no clue what I'm doing.
Sure.
So that's kind of where it got started. And once I fished that first tournament with them, I ended up with them for, I guess, 18 years. I fished with the Ridge Anglers Bass Club. Best thing I ever done. The guys in that club were just so gracious with me. Basically, every one of them took a young, I don't want to say kid, but when it came to fishing, I was a kid. I had no clue. Kind of took me under their wing. There was no secrets held. They basically helped me, worked with me, and was with them for 18 years. And best thing I ever done was joining that club. So yeah, that's kind of how it got started there, Jay.
Okay, we have a couple of comments here. First one, the Facebook Live guy called me a poacher. That's just fun. When I was a kid, man, we didn't know any better. We just wandered down the streams. It didn't matter who owned the land.
Yeah.
Like I was poaching on somebody else's land. That's fine.
Yeah.
And you know what? I really didn't care because I was faster than all of them when I was a kid. Now that I can run a full 3 miles an hour, I don't do stuff like that anymore.
Yeah, right.
And Josh Nelson, a good friend of mine, he actually lives up there in Port Clinton, Ohio.
What's up, Josh?
Lake Erie. That's where a 10-pound smallmouth bass came out in the last couple of years.
Oh, wow.
Josh Nelson loves to fish the Great Lakes. He said, good evening to you too, Josh. And Facebook Live guy. Man, Clint, I know you're just kidding. Clint's a good friend of mine. He's actually both Clint and Josh have been on this show as well. So you're, man, that is awesome. So you're down there in Florida. You got your feet wet in a bass club, which is where most of us got our feet wet. Were you guiding in Florida too?
Yes, not at that time, of course, when I joined that club. Now I started guiding, several years later, quite a bit later after that, but I don't even know the year I started guiding. Right now to present, I've been guiding for 18 years.
There you go.
So
there you go. Well, you made it 1 year longer than I made it. My guide career spanned 17 years. And man, if you can guide here's to you.
Thank you, brother.
If you can do a job like that for 18 years, because it's kind of like kind of like tournament fishing. There's always something wrong with your rig. You got to borrow rigs. You have to beg people, please fix this. I have 3 guide trips next week, and I have to pay my mortgage.
Exactly. And when I started fishing that club, I could kind of see myself improving as time went on. And I fished it 95, 96. I fished it 2 full seasons, and half of the 3rd season, 97, before I actually came even near cashing a check.
Yeah, well, that's...
And see, the thing you run into, even with today's clubs, is That's why you have so many people in club fishing come and go, because they'll
Yes.
jump into clubs. And I tell you what, I don't care where you are, what club you belong to around the United States. If you join a club, you better be ready, because these club anglers, the majority of your club fishermen are hammers. So there's
And they
no
grew up in that
easy
area.
to
They've been
win a
fishing that
tournament.
since they were 4 years old. I get it, man. There's some stiff
Yeah.
competition in those clubs.
So yeah, and it took me 2.5 years, and finally, when I tasted that first, uh, I came in second, like midway through the season, on one of the lakes that I ended up guiding on several years later. When I started guiding full time, is one of the lakes where that tournament actually was. Had four fish that weighed right at 20 pounds, and
Woo!
that was the biggest weight. I mean, I was up to that point, I was weighing in like 1 pound, 3 pounds, 5 pounds. I actually, up to that point in 2.5 years, never broke the five fish 10 pound mark.
Wow.
So I was still learning at that point, but something all just clicked right in that tournament, and I ended up with four fish that weighed right at 20 pounds. Took second, and I mean, and they say once you win, something clicks up here, and you kind of start knowing how to win now. So
Yeah.
all it took was that first check cash for second place, and then it started coming a little bit more frequently, I should say. So that was the only time I cashed that year. Of course, that was like three-quarters of the way through the season. The next year in the club, I think we ended up cashing a check, which is first, second, or third. We ended up cashing a check in 5 out of the 9 tournaments in that season.
There you go.
So
There
that
you
one,
go.
all it took was that one tournament for me to kind of get the idea of how to start winning, and I guess it kind of triggered something.
So when you were down there in Florida, you said one of the lakes that you fished was actually you were actually targeting offshore structure,
Yeah.
deep deep structure. How did you do that? What kind of presentation did you use?
Well, yeah, I guide on two lakes and I still guide on them lakes. I'm down there. I typically will go down about a month every February, March, just still, because I still got a lot of clients down there so I still go down about a month every year just to guide, just to keep up my status down there. But there's two lakes in the Lake Placid area that is kind of untypical of what you typically think on a Florida lake. Typically, Florida lakes, first thing that comes to mind is shallow water fishing, 2 to 5 foot,
Yes.
a lot of flipping, a lot of shallow water covering, a lot of bank beating. There's two lakes in Lake Placid, Lake, or the one, like, it's actually Lake Charles, but it's better known as Lake Placid,
Sure.
after the name of the town.
Where the
And
big
the other lake's Lake
alligators are.
June, and they're basically both deep bowl-shaped lakes.
Wow.
Typically, there is shoreline fishing around them, but the majority of your bigger fish, if you want to learn how to fish in lakes properly, you got to get offshore. There's a lot of shell beds, a lot of brush piles, you stuff like that, and the fish that live out offshore, every one of them fish is resident fish. Um, I'm not going to say none of them fish actually go shallow, but they go shallow. If they do go shallow for any reason, an hour later they're back out to where they live. And the reason for that is there's so much structure, so much shell beds. They don't need to ever go in shallow as long as they have enough food to eat out deep. Which that structure, the shell beds, of course, shell beds. That's what the bait fish live off of, is the shell beds. When people say shell bed, what they're talking about is actually a living, breathing clam or mussel bed.
Sure.
That's what the bait fish, your shiner, your wild shiners, your brim, your bluegill, your crappie, that is what they feed on. So being that brings your bait fish, now that's going to draw the bass behind it. So anytime you got a good concentration of bait fish out offshore that really never has to leave because they stay out there, you're going to have bass that's never going to want to leave. So basically, they call it resident fish. If they do go in, they're right back out. So, and even like spawning, most people pre and post spawn fish.
Yeah.
They're wanting to bank. Now, I've never been an advocate for sight fishing, spawning fish. I don't believe in it. Even when I fish tournaments, I won't. And first of all, I'm not that good at it. I have a hard time seeing like other anglers do, but I still would not sight fish in tournaments just because I don't believe in pulling fish off a bed. And even if it took it to win, I won't do it, which there's nothing against it. In my belief, I just don't like doing it. But here's the thing. Tournament fishing on a deep water lake, think about this. If you got bait fish, or you find a shell bed that's fairly close to a spawning area where the fish are going to go in to do their heeing and sheeing, okay? You find a shell bed close to that in 18, 19 foot of water, where are them fish going to pre and post spawn at?
Huh.
Okay. Now, you find a shell bed or someplace where them fish are pre and post spawning off of a major spawning area or a spawning flat on the bank. Why would you go in 4 or 5 foot of water and spend 2 hours looking for that one fish that would help your cause in the tournament? And then once you find her, it might take you another hour to get her to commit. Okay. And then you might not ever get her to bite and you have to move on because you're wasting too much time with her. Or you could go in 18, 19 foot of water where they're pre and post spawning and they're hungry. That's what they're doing there. They're eating because they haven't eaten in 3 or 4 days while they're spawning. So you could go in them spawning areas or the pre and post spawn areas instead of looking for one fish. The time it takes you to catch 1, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pound female on a bed, you could catch 5, 6 to 8 pounders that are actually pre-spawning that either just are getting ready to move in, they're feeding their bellies before they do so, or they just moved out off of bed and they're feeding their bellies because they haven't eaten in 4 days, so they're hungry. So that even fishing like there's never any major trail tournaments on these two lakes because they're too small. They'd only hold, a 30 boat tournament's big for those lakes. But when you're fishing tournaments on those lakes during that time of the year, that always played into my wheelhouse is because I could go in these areas and catch a 5-fish limit of 6 pounders a lot quicker than you could go inside and catch 1 6-pounder laying on a bed.
So nowadays you live up in Tennessee for most of the year, don't you?
Yeah, I'm full time in Tennessee now. Moved up here about 3 years ago. We have family up here. 2 daughters that live up here, and my wife wanted to kind of move closer to them. She was kind of getting lonely for the family, so we decided to make the move, and it's been a pretty good move so far. Enjoying it.
And so you guide 2 lakes now in Tennessee of Chickamauga and Nickajack, correct?
Yeah, Chickamauga, Lake Chickamauga and Nickajack Lake. Yes, sir.
Wow, man, I'm impressed by that. You have really gotten to know some of the better bass lakes in the world.
Yeah, and coming up here fishing, basically growing up in Florida, fishing Florida lakes pretty much all my life. Of course, I fished these lakes before up here, but spending 5 days on a body of water just doesn't do it when you're trying to learn a lake. Especially you come up fishing tournaments out of the state of Florida, you have 3 days of practice, and most of the lakes that I would hit are brand new lakes that I never fished before. So when you come up and decide you're going to move up here full time, tell you what, it's a long road to hoe. It probably took me the better part of a year spending countless hours on both of those lakes before I even felt comfortable enough to start taking clients out. So right now I'm guiding full time. I've been up here for 3 years and pretty much guiding full time for 2 of those years. I spent the first year pretty much just doing nothing but on the water.
on the water every single day, learning everything you can learn because
Yeah, and you got to, because where I grew up, I mean, and anybody that fished both, has fished in Florida and fished out of the state of Florida, they know what I'm talking about.
absolutely
It's night and
Florida's
day difference versus what you grew up doing it one way. Now you come up, having to deal with current driven body of waters. You don't get a lot of current driven. Okeechobee a little bit sometimes here and there, depending on where you are, but you don't get current driven body of waters outside this. I mean, North Florida you do, but when you get up here, I mean, that's a lot of the majority of it actually is current driven body waters.
Okay, there's a couple things I'd like to cover now. Number one, you talked about how one of your go-to presentations is Carolina rigging.
Yeah.
You showed me a 14 and a half inch just a monster thing that looks bigger than some of the dang snakes that I have here in Louisiana. So why don't you show us that?
All right. Bruiser Bait. I've actually been affiliated as a sponsor, or as one of my bait and tackle sponsors with Bruiser Bait for, quite some time now. Probably the past 9 years I've been with Bruiser. They came up or actually 5 years ago or 6 years ago. I don't even know the time frame, but this is their original version of what they call the Big Nasty. And what it is, it's it's 14.25 inches. All right, ribbon tail. All right, now
Wow.
I'm gonna show you this one here real quick. This is actually the V2, which is basically their second version of the Big Nasty, and this is a 14-inch versus the 14.25. But I want you to look at the difference in their tail on the V2 versus the V1. The V2 is almost like a corkscrew. But that's your V1 right here. Okay? It's basically just a ribbon tail design. Now, what you get with this V2, with the tail, I don't know if it's hard to see on camera, but there's actually a ridge that travels down both sides of the tail. So when this tail is moving in the water, it is displacing about 4 times the amount of water or water displacement that you're going to get with a typical ribbon tail. Plus, with that corkscrew design, you're going to get that much more vibration, that much more tail action out of it as well.
Okay, we have a couple of questions here. One of them is from Todd. Todd is a good friend of mine. He lived about 20 miles away from where I lived in Illinois. Todd would like to know where you live now.
Right now, I'm in Cleveland, Tennessee.
Cleveland, Tennessee. Okay, we have another question from a good friend of mine, Cajun Rob Welsh. He lives in southern Kentucky. He fishes a lot of Tennessee. He said, "Why has the TWRA quit letting tournaments lock to and from Watts Bar in Chickamauga all of a sudden?"
Yeah, you know what? That's a good question, and that's a little bit kind of out of my realm of expertise.
Okay, that's a fair answer, man.
Yeah, I feel you, and I understand where you're coming from and what you're getting at. But as far as to answer that question honestly, that's almost a question for the TVA. So, like I say, that's a little bit out of my league.
Okay, that's a fair question. Also, you showed me some really cool jigs that you're marketing now. I'd like to see those. Yeah, I'd like to show the folks and maybe let them know who can get a hold of you.
My business partner and my co-host on the Deck Talk podcast, we actually started Chattown Lures. That is one of our micro jigs. And we originally designed these for smallmouth on Nickajack. But you catch pretty much actually anything on them. I about a week ago, actually, no, I take that back, about a month ago. I'm getting ahead of myself there. About a month ago, I actually caught a 60-pound catfish on that same style bait right there.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. But anyway, and I'm just saying that to kind of go to the fact that pretty much.
And I have nothing against catfish. It's just, man, when you're out there, particularly if you're competitive fishing or if you're guiding for bass, you have to spend half an hour bringing in a bruiser leathermouth. Wow,
exactly right there. Yeah, when you,
Oh,
I was in a situation on Lake Kentucky one time, fishing a tournament, a 3 day or 2 day tournament, and I found a limit of fish. First place I was going to go to on a zero spook. They were crushing the topwater. Well, I got in there day one of the tournament, and my first two blow ups on the spook, and both of them ate it, annihilated it, and I ended up having to tighten my drag just to save time and let them straighten the hooks out. To I don't even know how big they were, stripers. I mean, biggest stripers I've ever seen. I'm like, what's the odds? I found a limit of 5 pounders there in practice. Didn't even see a striper, and I go there. My first two casts with the spook was two gigantic striper. But yeah, I got you what you're saying about time wasters. Yeah, and the catfish, same deal. I don't. I tell you what though, if I'm not fishing a competition,
yep.
and I have clients out there, um, you know, when you have clients on the boat, and even though we're going targeting bass, anything that tugs, especially a giant catfish, because you're in for a
Yes.
tussle. So
Yes.
as a
If I hook
guide,
into it,
I
hey,
have to
come here,
kind of
come here, grab my
rethink.
rod, grab my rod.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as a guide, I kind of have to rethink how my original thought process was about fishing and catching other species that I used to know as time wasters. Well, now as a guide, sometimes you got to kind of forget about that and just let your clients have a blast, even if it takes 45 minutes and you really want to catch a 6 pound smallmouth that's probably right around the corner.
So, how would a person get a hold of you if they were interested in getting your price list and in your product list for these
Yeah, I
jigs?
tell you what, you can message myself under Norman Lee, or you could also under Norman Lee Fishing as well, both places, or my partner Colin Burnett. But you can Facebook message us,
Sure.
and we'll get back to you pretty promptly. And when we get back to you, we'll basically send you a product list and a price list, and we'll reach out to you via phone after that. We actually are, working on getting a website up. We don't have a website up for the company yet, but as soon as we get a website up, it's going to make it a lot easier to order. But we can take orders right now. Just Facebook message us. If you're comfortable to give us your phone number. If not, Facebook message me, say I'm interested. One of us will actually Facebook message you back our phone number so you could get in touch with us. A lot of times it's easier to talk over the phone, and then we could actually either email or text you a price list and what we offer at this point. And but I'll show you one more bait that we're doing too is, and everything's hand tied. Everything we basically make everything. The only thing I will tell you we don't pour our own heads, but from painting the head, I mean, we basically do everything. But we tie them. But that's actually our swim jig.
Okay.
So,
So,
but
what weights are you going to be doing?
um, I mean, we can pretty much do any weight you want.
Sure.
Because again, remember, our baits are custom baits. When you order,
Sure.
we make them. We'll make them once you order. We try to get it turned. The turnaround time we try to get pretty quick back to you. But we custom make them. So if you tell us if you want a particular size, like in of course the micro jigs, our main micro jig is 3/16.
Sure.
And typically that's about what you're going to want in a micro jig. You don't want to really go up, because you go up any heavier and it's no longer a micro jig. But we can make them a little smaller. So if you text us what you want, what sizes, we can kind of work around your size, being that we do custom make everything.
Okay. That's awesome, man. That is just awesome. So, where so you use these micro jigs. So, man, we've talked about so much. I have like 16 different questions I want to ask you. So, you before the show we were talking, you said you've caught some pretty big largemouths on your micro jigs.
Yeah. They went on to catch smallmouth. Now we originally designed them because we're fishing nickerjack. Now when I'm guiding, if somebody wants to target smallmouth, we basically go to nickerjack. Nickerjack is a very good smallmouth reservoir or body water. It's part of the Tennessee River. It's actually the other side of the lock or the dam for Chickamauga. But very good smallmouth fishing.
Yeah.
So we'll go to nickerjack, but we originally designed the micro jigs for smallmouth. But we've caught 5 pound largemouth on these micro jigs as well, spotted bass. So you'll catch all species of bass on the micro jigs just because they're small. I mean,
You know,
you can
I'm
take a
excited
small
about
bait.
that.
I mean, you could catch a 10 pound bass on a small bait, and that's one thing that a big misconception that a lot of anglers have. They think just because the bait's small, you're going to catch small fish. Big bait or big bass is only going to hit baits like this. But that's kind of a little bit of a misconception. If a largemouth, if an 8 9 pound bass is hungry, she's going to eat just about anything you put in front of it, as long as you present it right to her. Presentation is the key.
Now, do you put? That's what I want to talk about. Do you put soft plastics in the back of a micro jig?
Yes, yeah. I don't have any here in front of me, but typically the soft plastics I use, we tip them with a short trailer, like a little swim bait type trailer. But I actually tip these with again, it's a bruiser bait product with what they call the McMinnow. And what that is, I don't know the exact length. It's like a 2.5 inch, uh, basically little finesse type soft plastic with the tail on, and that's my go-to.
Little
Is
swim
what I
bait?
tip it with. Very similar to swim bait. It's not really a swim. It doesn't have the paddle tail like you think. Most swim baits,
Sure.
you talk about swim bait, it's going to have the paddle tail. It's almost a straight type tail, but it's called the McMinnow. And make sure you got to check that product out along with your the big nasties at Bruiser Bait's website too as well. I don't know if you want to
Big
talk about
nasty.
that a little bit, but Bruiser Bait has a lot of great products out there. Not only the Big Nasty or the McMinnow, but that's they got a lot of other stuff out there as well. So
I love that. That's marketing genius, man. The big nasty. I just love it.
yeah.
It's just marketing genius.
One thing I'll add and talk about a little bit, and it's pretty well known. I mean, anybody that knows me, has been out with me, watches some of the videos we have out there on Carolina rigging. I use a little bit untypical, you should say, type of Carolina rig. The leader length is key on fine tuning your Carolina rig. And the reason behind the leader line is, think about this for a minute. The further you put that leader behind your weight, the better aggressive bite
Yes.
you're going to have with the fish when that weight goes by them. You get your typical leader length for Carolina rigs typically 18 to 20 inches. Most of the Carolina rigs you
Yes.
see any of the guys throwing is typically 18, 20 inches. Now, and the biggest question I have asked all the time is, how do you cast it? Well, I use a 7 foot leader. Now, basically, I measure it from my rod tip
7 foot leader.
into
Okay.
where my hook keeper is on the rod, and that puts it right at about 7 foot. And the way I first kind of determined that, I experimented with all different length leaders, and I tell you what, the longer you put that bait behind your weight, if I could physically cast a 10 or 12 foot leader, I'd be throwing a 10 or 12 foot leader because you generate. Now, when I was actually experimenting with it, I would have one rod out one way, one rod out the other, and my research on it is right at about 5 to 2. You will get 5 bites to 2 bites using a 7 foot leader versus 18 to 20 inch leader, and that
So are
that
you using
research was done
using
over a
soft
1 year period
plastics
of time.
that float?
Uh, Here's the thing with soft plastics: when you're throwing a Carolina rig, and just say you're using a wind drift to pull yourself or drift over a shell bed, there's not a worm out there that, if you're pulling that bait with, even when you're casting a Carolina rig, okay, when you
Yeah.
pull a Carolina rig to you, it's pulling that bait down, dude. There's not a floating worm. And people say that's how a Carolina rig works. That weight comes along, creating that disturbance. All of a sudden, the fish see that bait hovering above the weight, just sitting there hovering. Uh-uh. When you reel that Carolina rig or bring it back to you, or you're dragging it across the shell bed with the drift, that worm is on the bottom. There, it's not hovering like a lot of people, like you always hear said. Now there is floating worms out there that will float the hook, but as soon as you take a floating worm that does float and start bringing it back to you, it's going to drag it down. So a floating bait is more utilized in the way it's meant to be utilized as a floating worm when you're pretty much dead sticking it, or when you're
Yes.
pitching it or tossing it and just finessing it. It's going to float up there. But the minute you start kind of wanting to work the bait over a distance, it's going to drag that bait down. So that's a little bit of misconception. When you
And
Carolina,
you have to be patient to work it like that. It's going to take you 10 minutes to bring it in, huh?
Well, here's the thing. Yeah, you do have to have a lot of patience, but you're looking for pods of bait fish too.
That's true.
You're looking for concentrations of bait fish where there's going to be bigger fish in the area. So if you pull up onto the right area and there's fish there, you pull up onto the right area, it's like lights out. I mean, it could be lights out for 30 minutes. It could be lights out for the rest of the day. So yeah, it does take a lot of patience until you actually get located on the fish you're trying to target, and kind of get yourself dialed in on what you're fishing, where you're fishing, and what's down there. But as soon as you get dialed in on fishing the fish that you're targeting, I mean, you're fishing the fish. You don't fish areas trying to find fish. You're actually, once you pick up that Carolina rig, there's fish below you. And sometimes they'll bite, sometimes they won't. Just because there's fish down there, you got to kind of sometimes you got to wait them out. That's where the patience comes in. If they're not ready to eat at that time, sometimes it's a timing thing when you're fishing offshore. So sometimes it does require patience, but once that bite happens, once that light switch is flipped, I mean, it could be lights out for the rest of the day. So.
Okay. Norman, we have time for one more question, and we just got it from Todd. And Todd said, what is your leader material and what is it tied to? So mainline leader.
Yeah. Coming off my main line, typically when I Carolina rig fishing, I'm power fishing. When I Carolina rig, I'm Carolina rigging for giants, basically. Okay. Especially in South Florida. So my line coming off my reel typically is going to be 20 to 25 pound a monofilament. I'll have coming off my reel. And the line I use is Trilene Big Game. And the reason I use Big Game, very good line, very strong line, very inexpensive line. When I'm with me guiding, a lot of times I'll actually, whether it needs it or not, I strip my reels after every trip before my next trip. Just because you don't want a client to lose a fish of a lifetime because of a nick in the rod from the day before.
Yes.
So the price of that line allows me to do that, but very strong line. But 20-pound test coming off my reel, I always use a tad bit lighter line as my leader line. Tungsten are not cheap today. My tungsten weight, typically I'm going to throw like a 3/4 ounce tungsten, followed by, and here's another thing to think about too, when you're throwing a tungsten, everybody thinks glass bead on your typical Carolina rig. Well, tungsten cracks glass. Tungsten cracks glass bead. So, and again, going back to Bruiser Bait, they have a product called a barrel weight, which is it's a tungsten, but it's almost the shape of what a glass bead would look like with a hole going through it. So it's called their barrel weight, but I use that as the bead to follow it up. So now you got tungsten clanking against tungsten. So you get that much more of a clanking sound versus a clunking sound that you have with the original typical lead. And then my swivel, and then I'll run my leader line. My leader line is typically, if I'm throwing a 20-pound monofilament coming off my reel, I'll throw 17-pound fluorocarbon. You always want to throw the fluorocarbon as your leader. Typically, I'll go 17.3. And the reason I'll always go a little bit lighter on my leader line is because you are fishing 20 foot of water. You get hooked in a brush pile, you get hooked in something on the bottom. It's not like you could go to the bank and get it out. So I'd rather break off on a 30-cent hook than an $8 weight, basically. So if anything's going to break, it's going to be my leader line and the hook versus, my whole rig. So that's kind of why I always stay with a little bit lighter leader line.
Okay, we only have a couple minutes left. Why don't you tell the people where they can find your Deck Talk podcast?
Yeah, yeah, man. Go to YouTube now. We stream live every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern time, weekly. You could find us on YouTube. You could search Deck Talk Podcast YouTube channel, as well as my YouTube channel, which is normally fishing, or my co-host Colin Burnett's YouTube channel, which is CMB Bassin 1983. All right, or you can also find it streamed on Facebook as well.
Okay.
Plus,
Facebook.
we are also, if you don't actually catch us live, we now are on all the major podcasting platforms to listen at your convenience audio as well.
That's very good. That's excellent. Okay, so thank you, Todd, for some great questions. Josh Nelson just said, great show, and thank you, guys. Josh, man, thank you so much. Josh is such a good friend of mine, such a great supporter of the Let's Talk Fishing podcast.
That's awesome, thanks,
and
Josh.
that's exactly why I wanted you to announce that tonight, just in case these guys can't watch it. Guys, come on, log in. Watch us tomorrow too on the Let's Talk Fishing podcast Thursday edition, because Norman Lee is going to be back along with Colin Burnett, and we're going to let's talk the Deck Talk podcast.
Awesome, man. Thanks, Jay.
So we're gonna do that all over again. Norman, man, do you have any shout outs you'd like to do?
Yes, sir. Real quick, I want to shout out to all my sponsors and anybody that knows what we do and knows we can't do this by ourselves. It takes people behind us. It takes a support system. And I will say my biggest support system, and I can't say my sponsors without mentioning my wife. Even though I'm not doing it the competitive side anymore, I'm still gone from time to time. So she still has to deal with that, with what we do with our sponsor obligations and stuff. But yeah, Bruiser Baits, man, Bass Addiction Gear, Spear Point Performance Hooks. You got to check them out. Power Core Rods, YOLO Tech, Elite Glow, Deep South Vinyl, Riff Mask, iBass 360, Rob, Eric, brothers, you are the best.
Oh, no.
And
okay, the last thing we heard was iBass 360.
Yeah.
And you froze for a second.
Okay, iBass 360, and then I gave a shout out to Rob and Eric, Rob Zorn, Eric Evans with iBass 360.
Class act, those guys, man.
Them guys are so fabulous. Great. I've so much enjoy being a part of the iBass 360 family. And then Proline Baits, Bucked Up Energy Drink, Firefly Outdoor Marine, Power Pole. And again, Power Pole, just like Bruiser Baits, I've been with Bruiser Baits for so long now, but Power Pole I've been with for 20 years, almost from day one of Power Pole. So just a great company, a great fan. Even though Power Pole now is getting bigger and bigger, they're still maintaining the family atmosphere of the company, so you can't beat them. And then again, Chat Down Low is our company that we talked about tonight.
Well, thank you so much, Norman. I know you're a busy man. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and talk to our listeners, or actually our viewers here on the Let's Talk Fishing podcast. And man, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in to the Let's Talk Fishing podcast, man. I say I can't do it without people like Norman. Well, I also can't do it without viewers like you guys watching. I just can't, and I can't do it without sponsors. It takes everybody. It takes an entire village to support a podcast, and that's why, Norman, proud to have you on my podcast, man. I just love to network with guys like you, and we can bounce ideas off of each other. It's fantastic. This is going to be a very good partnership we're going to have. And guys, you know what? It's Wednesday night. Make your plans. Go fishing this weekend, because you only get to do this life once. And
yes,
from a man as old as I am, enjoy your life. Norman, please stick around for a couple minutes. I'm gonna end the podcast with that. Guys, thank you very much for watching.